is being systematically eradicated by the world's most populous nation. The country which inspired Shangri-La today has one main hope. His name is Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet.
Binul mo lang yung sa'yo. Binul mo laro. Kasi hindi ata lahat ng ano yun.
I first met the Dalai Lama at a conference in 1984. I thought he was very funny and he had a great laugh.
I'm a good swing. My small garden.
To the Tibetans, the Dalai Lama is their spiritual and secular leader. He is the 14th incarnation or reincarnation of Chenrezig, their deity of infinite compassion and mercy. The Dalai Lama has a keen mind with wide-ranging interests. He teaches the essence of Buddhism to hundreds of thousands of people. He lectures to the faculty of the Harvard Medical School on the nature of consciousness. He won the 1989 Nobel Peace Prize. He also likes to repair watches.
That period had many old-fashioned watches. So this is my job, I always want to watch. Some are too old, not working properly, and also it's partly my nature. As soon as I got something, play toy, few minutes I play, then try to open what is inside. So that's the way to learn something. Then later these days, that knowledge sometimes quite helpful. Some watch or something, certain mechanic thing, something wrong. Then usually I can repair. So that I can save some money. Not the nicest, right? Sometimes instead of improving, sometimes make worse.
For over 30 years, the Dalai Lama has been forced to live in exile because of the brutal occupation of Tibet by the Communist Chinese. He lives today in a small refugee community nestled in the foothills of the Himalayas in northern India. The town of Dharamsala grows refugees to this day. Each comes with a story to tell.
The Chinese army issued an announcement saying that young girls would be taught medical and nursing skills if they joined. We give you and your parents many privileges, the announcement said. So for that reason, I enlisted in January 1983. I was only 14 years old. When I first arrived, I was told that my most important responsibility was to fulfill every wish of my superior officers. That night, several Chinese officers began ripping off my clothes. I couldn't make them stop. Then I was raped by 3 officers. There were 12 girls like me, and on any one night, each girl would have to sleep with 3 or 4 Chinese officers.
The horror began in 1950, when the newly formed People's Republic of China invaded Tibet, nearly doubling their landmass. The Chinese wanted the natural resources, they wanted the wealth, and they wanted to control the high ground of Asia. They said they were liberating Tibet from imperialist forces. Because of Tibet's isolation and nonviolent Buddhist ideals, the 6 million Tibetans were easily overrun. The Chinese then began a policy which the International Commission of Jurists would later report to the United Nations was genocide against the Tibetan people, its culture, and religion. responded by calling upon the teenage Dalai Lama to take control of the country as the head of state.
How old were you when that happened?
Oh, 16, I think. 16.
It's a very young age to take over a nation.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Oh, yes. No doubt. No doubt. Even the previous Dalai Lama, when he took the full responsibility of 18 years, 18 years age, my case, younger.
For more than 8 years, the Dalai Lama tried to protect his people from the Chinese onslaught.
Then, you see, things getting worse and worse. Then, 1959, around January, February, things really become, see, tense. And finally, it was certain now things definitely become out of my control. Then, you see, there is no hope for dialogue with Chinese. So there is no other alternative except to see escape. So it's a finally I decided. With sadness, finally I left Lhasa.
The night we left, my mother, my sister, myself, and some of our people who helped us. We left Lhapa somewhere at about 9:30 in the evening. And His Holiness followed after half an hour. We had no moonlight, but we could see the lights of the Chinese camp towards the west. And I don't think they're very far, they're just about 300 yards away. And from the day we left Lhasa until we reached the Indian border, it took 70 days. And this one is here. Okay. That's me. Then the group.
How old were you?
Was going to be 13.
When His Holiness fled to India, it was as if the sun went down in Tibet. In the rest of the world, the sun continued to shine, but not in Tibet. We were living in darkness.
The Chinese method for controlling Tibet and Tibetans has always been and continues to be the use of intimidation and brute force.
The Chinese themselves, they are losing self-confidence. So when you see people who lost their self-confidence and reason, then you see they only rely on using force. That is a sign of weakness.
Your Holiness, do you hate the Chinese?
No. Almost none. Sometimes I guess I lose some temper, but almost none. Any hatred feeling. And instead, say, afterward, I get just more concern, more compassion towards them. And in my daily prayer, you see, there's some certain practices they call exchange or take and give. This is my positive mental thought. Give them through imagination. This is take their ignorance and their suffering, their anger, their hatred. This is take into myself. So that kind of practice I seriously do.
The flood of refugees continues to this day. They risk their lives escaping from Tibet so that they can freely practice their Buddhist religion, help maintain their culture, and be near their cherished leader, the Dalai Lama. Conditions are so bad in occupied Tibet that each year thousands of parents will even send their children over the Himalayan mountains so that they can grow up in freedom. The journey on foot is long and arduous. Many children do not make it. Many have died on the way.
They came to the peace border with their parents. And at the border, the parents were stopped because they didn't have a pass. And the parents sent the kids saying, we'll come later to try some of to get into India, but they haven't come yet. So we have alone. Some of their fingers with coats and things like that. And he didn't know how to do that, and he used his fingers to play. So, frostbite on this finger. And in case gangrene, we had to amputate at the joints.
childhood, almost like a dream, so many years back, My sister, my elder sister, and then me, and then my second brother, my third brother, and then my fourth brother, his Holiness, we're all born in the cow barn. So in the Tibetan custom, we think you give a birth, then we should go to the straw house or straw room or go to the cow barn because you make mass. That's right.
I remember the day in 1933 when His Holiness, the 13th Dalai Lama, passed away. His precious body was embalmed and placed in state facing south in the Potala Palace in Lhasa. One day, we went to pray before his venerable body and were startled to find that the Dalai Lama's head had turned itself and was now facing to the northeast. A year and a half later, the regent of Tibet led us on a journey 10 days south of Lhasa to a sacred lake known for auspicious visions. For days we fasted and prayed and observed the lake. We stared into the water until miraculously a vision appeared of a 3-story temple with a gold roof. To the east stood a small peasant farmhouse with unusual blue eaves. These and other auspicious signs all pointed northeastward. So parties consisting of high lamas and reincarnated beings set out in that direction. After months of travel and inquiry, we found a house such as had appeared in the regent's vision. The highest lama of a party, who had been a close friend of the 13th Dalai Lama, was dressed as a beggar. He was met at the door by a woman holding a most precautious child.
And these monks wear these beads, 13th Dalai Lama's beads on their neck, and they come to the door and say, please help us, give us some food. And my mother carried this child on the arm. And this child hold this clothes, said, you remember me? and his little hand wants to his neck and here and pull out his prayer bead. This is mine. Why you keep it? This is mine. Talk such a thing like that. And my mother said, I can't do this child or something, you know, but don't do this such a thing. Then this old man is crying, you know, and it's almost come to, you know, hug this child.
Several weeks later, we returned to the house. The Lama spread out, among other things, a rosary, a walking stick, and a drum, which had belonged to the 13th Dalai Lama. Next to each, they placed a more ornate copy. Without hesitation, the divine child gathered the Dalai Lama's things, his things, and disdained the fancier copies. We turned and stared at each other with tears in our eyes, scarcely able to breathe. The Dalai Lama had been reborn and was looking at us through the eyes of this remarkable child.
Few occasions, in dream, I remember some of my previous lives, but these are mysterious. I'm wondering whether it's worth the worthwhile to discuss. I don't know. Things past is past.
For me, I don't consider His Holiness as a brother, in the sense that, you know, when His Holiness is recognized as Dalai Lama, he is taken from the family and he stays up in the Potala. It's a very different thing from an ordinary brother in an ordinary family.
Shaded by a peacock umbrella, and then he looked very curiously out of the window at me. It was carried by 36 people, and everybody was lying down on his head, to look up at him. Our friendship became very late. It began actually not long before the Chinese started threatening Tibet that they are going to liberate them. Tibetans. And because in Tibet nobody knew of whom and of what they were going to be liberated, because it was only Peter Ashland and me staying in Lhapa. He was a lonely little boy. He wanted to have someone to talk to and who knew a little bit from the West. He wanted to hear more of the world, and I could tell him. I think he was like any other boy, but he had no chance to be like any other boy.
When I saw some boys and girls play, then I realized to see wanted to join. So that indicates some, I think, feeling of isolation. At the same time, I have very good playmates. To those sweepers, on the age is beautiful, vast differences, but they act like big like boys. And they play equally. They never accept their defeat. So sometimes they make me cry. I defeated, so sometimes I feel angry and cry. I still feel they are very kind, very kind, very kind. Not competition. I think sense of competition.
The people who were concerned, who were supposed to look after him, who were his teachers, I think they were rather strict with him. No, it's not like, oh, you are the Dalai Lama, you can do what you want. I think that's totally out. It's not the way.
Rinpoche, my tutor, and till his last day, my best friend or my best teacher. So, since my childhood, he looked after me. Very kind. At the beginning, when I was very young, he never smiled to me. He never showed smile. That's why I'm a little bit afraid. I think now I realize he acted like as a good teacher. A little bit scared me. Strict. My father.
In 1983, Ling Rinpoche died in Dharamsala, India. 2 years later, his reincarnation was found in the Tibetan children's village, just a half a mile away from where he died. Today, the young Ling Rinpoche is 6 years old. He's being trained in the same way that the young Dalai Lama was trained by the previous Ling Rinpoche. Throughout his childhood, the Dalai Lama was schooled in the rigors of Tibetan Buddhism. He had to learn the rituals and discipline, and his mind was trained to a laser-like clarity. His course of study included logic, Tibetan art and culture, Sanskrit, medicine, cosmology, poetry, music and drama, and philosophy. At the end of nearly 2 decades of education, he took his oral exams for the Geisha degree, equivalent to a doctorate of philosophy. For these exams, he had to debate with the most learned scholars of the day in front of 20,000 monks. His performance was remarkable. It was all the more extraordinary because for 8 years leading up to his exams, he had to divide his time between his strenuous religious training and leading a nation living under occupation. One of his first actions as head of state was to confront his enemies directly. He went to China to meet with Mao and Zhou Enlai. He went to argue for the fate of his country, and he had just turned 19.
So I went there to Peking. During that time, although not a negotiation, but a serious discussion with China regarding future state. I was anxious, but then every discussion with Chinese leaders, especially Chairman Mao, outwardly, things not difficult. His manner, the way of conduct, is so gentle, it's so friendly. At that time, I believed we developed some kind of, I think, some kind of understanding that I felt. But then later, it seems, my conviction or my observation seems, I think, seems wrong. At last audience of Chairman Mao, he expressed the religion is poison for country. He pointed to 2 points. One, that's the great damage for population and the material development. So that moment, I really felt it was quite bad that this person really the destroyer of Lama, of religion.
And destroy religion they did. The once grand monasteries of Tibet were the cornerstones of the society. Some of them housed as many as 10,000 monks. They were Tibet's schools and universities. They were its libraries and medical centers. Over 95% of the 6,000 monasteries, temples, and shrines have been destroyed by the communist Chinese. They've been pillaged and are now in ruins. Most of the lamas, monks, nuns, and teachers are among the 1.2 million Tibetans who have lost their lives because of the Chinese invasion. This ancient tradition, which the communist Chinese are trying to eradicate in Tibet, is based on an individual training his or her mind to understand the deepest levels of existence.
My daily practice is preparation for death. Through meditation, make separation in body and consciousness. So, unless you reach the deepest subtle consciousness, you cannot separate this body and mind. So once you reach that deepest stage, then it can separate. And then go deeper, 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 then the deepest, that clear light. So initially, sometimes I do, during the past, I experienced 7 times death and rebirth. And then when the actual death happened, then this practice becomes very useful. The Tibetan Buddhism seems to see very much more about the technique and the way of training of mind. Therefore, as not as a religion, but rather as a certain method or certain technique to improve one's mind. Therefore, I think the Tibetan tradition has some potential to contribute for humanity.
Today, Tibetan Buddhism can only be freely practiced outside of Tibet. Here, over 200,000 people have gathered in northern India to receive a sacred teaching from the Dalai Lama. The initiates take vows to gain enlightenment. They do it not for themselves, but in order to help others. The teaching centers on a mandala made completely of sand. It represents an idealized realm where the world is in complete harmony. If grains of sand can become a reflection of the divine, just think what can be done with a human being. Visualizing the mandala with the proper motivation, the initiate can begin the journey to a tranquil understanding that's known as enlightenment.
I always consider happiness or joy as purpose of life, since everyone is one happiness. And without the inner tranquility, there's no possibility to achieve genuine lasting happiness. That's why I call love and compassion is universal religion. own happiness and joy depend on others. So therefore, in order to achieve one's own happiness, you should take care. You should serve other people. You should create more happiness from other people, then ultimately you get the benefit.
Summer of 1987, I decided that I would set off in the autumn in Asia. I bought a one-way ticket to Pakistan, packed the rucksack, had a few injections, decided to see what happened. When I first decided to go to Tibet, I expected to see Buddhists and temples. I had this idealistic picture of easygoing and nice people. We travelled south to a place called Gyansi. And I was walking along the street and I saw a Chinese soldier came cycling down the road the opposite direction. And he saw me and he swerved across the road and jumped off his bike and started gabbling in Chinese and pointing at me. What have I done? Now I didn't understand any Chinese and I was by myself. And he was pointing and pointing at me. What is it? And all these Tibetans started to gather around. And they were pointing at me. And they were going, Dalai Lama, Dalai Lama. Oh, what's happening? And I looked down and they were all pointing at my t-shirt. And it slowly dawned on me that they thought that Sergeant Ilka was Dalai Lama. We both got glasses on and when he wouldn't have it, he got more and more angry and more Tibetans came. And he tried to pull it off. And he said, that's got nothing to do with me. And I lifted it up. And he, and he crossed my hands across the chest so that no one could see this t-shirt he found so offensive. I thought it was funny, but it was also quite frightening, so I wanted to laugh, and I thought if I did laugh, he might do something awful.
The Chinese searched my room and found religious books and a photograph of His Holiness. For that reason, I spent a year in prison.
It did make me feel more strongly that it could happen, to me. And it could happen to anybody, anything, could happen.
And I was hit by a bullet on my wrist, and it came out the other side. They were killing Tibetans like they were killing animals. Chinese Communist Party in Tibet for 20 years. I worked for the Internal Police and for 6 years in the Security Bureau. I have seen the Chinese use many methods to torture Tibetans. I have made a list of 33. While in prison, the Chinese beat me up with huge rocks on the back, and it affected my kidneys. They are still damaged. And then they bound my arms from both sides and put them in the back. And my shoulders were dislocated. I thought I was going to die, so I just fixed my mind on His Holiness. The Chinese strapped me to a chair, attached wires to my legs, and wrapped wires around my fingers. When they would flip a switch, my whole body would jump off the chair from the pain.
My brother-in-law and I were arrested together and marched around in front of our village. Then the Chinese shot him in the head, and his blood splattered all over me. The Chinese said, "So you call for His Holiness the Dalai Lama and call on America for help. But where are they? Will anyone help you? If you obey China, your path will be smooth. If you don't, watch what happens to these two."
The Tibetan people are suffering immeasurably under the Chinese. Countless beatings and killings. And though the Chinese say there is freedom of religion, they don't allow us to practice our faith. These tortures are given to those Tibetans who express strong nationalist feelings. People who passionately declare, "This is Tibet. Tibet is my country."
At this moment, the most serious thing is two things happen. The immeasurable, unthinkable human rights violation, the torture, beating, the killing, and then the population transfer. And on the other hand, it's very, very restrictive policy about its birth control. So therefore, there is real danger. So some, my friend called this, the Chinese policy is something, the final solution. So things are really serious.
In response to all the Chinese atrocities, the Dalai Lama promotes a policy of nonviolence and compassion. For his 30-year struggle, he received the 1989 Nobel Peace Prize. Recently, in Sarnath, India, he led 80,000 people on a march to pray for world peace.
Now, His Holiness' power is moral power, which the world used to have before, but right now it's overshadowed by political power. And whatever he does, it's based on goodness of maximum number of human beings. So it's based on altruism. Do I make sense?
And other political leaders today are not motivated by the same thing.
I don't rule out the possibility, but it's pretty hard to see. I rule out the possibility, but I don't see it.
After the peace march, people gathered around to pray and make offerings to the spot where he had sat. To them, it had become holy ground. shunned by every government around the world for over 30 years. Recently, the newly elected president of Czechoslovakia, Václav Havel, recognized the Dalai Lama as the legitimate leader of Tibet. He did this within 13 hours of taking office. A few weeks later, the Chinese canceled lucrative contracts with the Czechs. Because of China's size and power, governments are reluctant to do anything to challenge China's actions in Tibet. This conspiracy of silence allows China to continue its destruction of the Tibetan culture, religion, and people.
To this moment, actually we are really passing through most difficult period. So the only our hope is Lama outside world and people from free country. That's our only say source.
In 1991, despite orchestrated Chinese pressure and over strenuous State Department objections, the Congress of the United States finally invited the Dalai Lama to address its members.
Here I am enjoying the freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of movement. You, this nation, very much involved, or very much cherish these principles. However, so when I was about 15, I lost that freedom. And worst thing, thousands of Tibetan brothers and sisters not only lost the freedom, but they suffered tremendously. So, a genuine sense of universal responsibility is the realization of oneness, entire humanity. With these principles, I think we can solve many problems. This is my hope and my prayer.
Meanwhile, across town at the Department of State, I spoke to the head of the China desk.
Official U.S. policy has consistently regarded Tibet as a part of China, although an autonomous region within China.
My crime was that in 1959, I signed a statement saying that Tibet was an independent country. For that, I spent 17 years in Chinese prisons and concentration camps.
We have no evidence at this point that the Chinese government is engaged in any policy or in any actions aimed at wiping out the Tibetans, or in short, reflecting a policy of genocide either against the Tibetan people themselves or against their culture.
I mean, Tibetans are no longer wearing Tibetan clothes. Tibetans now they're talking Tibetan, or the Chinese wear Chinese with this blue uniform, everybody. And the monasteries are no longer in the monastery, and no monks are there.
They used to have mobile clinics which would go from village to village and just get the women together and get them sterilized. Or even women who are pregnant in their 9th month were made to abort their children.
What about self-determination for Tibetans?
Tibet is change of the people. The serfs of the past have become masters of today.
The Chinese have been doing a lot of propaganda about the progress made in Tibet, and so His Holiness asked them, if you have made so much progress in Tibet, why don't you allow for some of the Tibetans to come to Tibet and see for themselves all the good things that you have done? Because the Chinese felt that in Tibet they had really liberated the Tibetans out of misery. But then, of course, when we visited, it was just the opposite. And I think, the visit of the delegations is really sort of backfired. Everywhere we went, we were completely mobbed, and the people would all come to us because we were being sent by His Holiness, and of course knowing that our His Holiness' sister, they would come and ask for blessings. They would come and ask for His Holiness' photographs, and they just wanted to touch us. There was not one family who did not lose somebody, their life was lost either in the concentration camp, or in one of the labor camps, or in the prison, or they had terrible tales to tell.
So then you talk with them, their sisters, their brothers, their uncles, their father of the killed. What happened to your father? Passed away. How he died? You don't know. Tears. Just few days after that, all the 6 weeks, my body, my whole thing become not belong to me, something is, numb,
Tibet and Chinese rule for about 30 years, yes. That's when we went, and I think the situation was worse than what it was before. Maybe Tibet was backward, but then we were happy, and we had enough to eat and enough to wear, yes, for the people. But then, under 30 years of Chinese rule, it was really terrible. What I saw there, it was something very painful. And I think each time I talk of what I saw today, I have to be in tears.
The Dalai Lama personally reads all of the new arrivals that make it to Dharamsala from Tibet. He offers them words of encouragement. To some, he offers guidance. To all, he gives a prayer and a blessing. He is their one remaining constant, the embodiment of compassion. In exile, he keeps alive their religion, their culture, and their identity as a people. Now, He is the source of their hope. For many, the brief moment of meeting him is the high point of their lives.
Basically, as a Buddhist practitioner, the main purpose of life is serving, helping, or at least contribute some happiness to others, including animals, insects. Ultimately, you get some satisfaction, inner peace. So that's basic. Then, as long as I remain as a refugee, I will remain as a leader. And then when we regain our freedom, our right, I will be no more as a leader, remain as a ordinary Buddhist monk, simple Buddhist monk. Then, if possible, I very much want to remain in isolated place. More rigorous meditation. This is my wish. And then, the preparation for last days. So whether those preparations really effective or not, then I know. So that's the plan of my whole life.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. What you saw earlier was a film showing of Compassion in Exile, the story of the 14th Dalai Lama. We hope that it gave you some perspective for today's forum. Later on, we will hear from several of our guests to expound further on this topic. So before we proceed to the program proper, may I request everyone to rise for the Philippine National Anthem, to be followed by the Anthem of the Dead.
Bayang magiliw, dala sa silanganan, alab ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hiniram, dulan na lang magiging, sa manlulupi, di ka pasisigit, sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bughaw. May dilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal, ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagdinining. Ang bituin at araw na kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng walhati pagsinta, buhay ang langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Ladies and gentlemen, this forum is entitled Save Tibet. It is a forum on human rights violations. It is brought to you by the UP College of Law in cooperation with the Law Student Government and in cooperation with the Law Student Government and the Defense Support Group Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed to the program proper, the organizers would like to acknowledge the following institutions, the following individuals who decided to grace our event today. There is the Central Escolar University, the Adamson University, the Asian Center of the University of the Philippines, the Technological Institute of the Philippines in Quezon City, the Philippine Women's University, the Task Force Detainees of the Philippines, Miriam College International Studies, the Arellano University Main Campus, the Quezon City Polytechnic University, the Philippine Coalition for the ICC, the UP, the Philippine Collegiate, the Public Administration students from ERIS, La Consolacion College, San Beda College, the FEU East Asia College of Manila, the Philippine Christian University, the University of the Philippines, Manila, and the Ateneo School of Sciences. We also like to acknowledge certain individuals who decided to be guests also this morning. There is Dr. Maria Cristina Padolina of CEU, Dean Carlos Sobrichea of the Asian Center, President Antonio Solido of the Technological Institute of the Philippines, Mr. Ernesto Baluyot of PWU, Deputy Executive Director Rita Meliseo of the Task Force Detainees of the Philippines, Mr. John Benedict Olive of Arellano University, Ms. Rebecca Lozada of the Philippine Coalition for the ICC, Ms. Mary Ruby Palma of the QC Gender and Development, and Professor Descendeseo of the Department of Psychology of the UPCSSP. To these individuals and institutions and anyone else who we may have this, welcome and thank you for taking part in this event. Before we go to our guests, to our guest speakers, we'd like to call on our Associate Dean, Ms. Concepcion L. Arteleza, for the welcome remarks.
Mapagla. Hindi mo niya. Hindi na. Hindi natin natin. Kaya na.
Good morning to all of you. When we had Tibet in our world history class in high school, Tibet was described with a society in which the concept of human rights are unknown, that it is cut off from the rest of the world, that the people live off Buddha's teachings. Their religion, language, literature, art, ideas concerning the environment and the way of life unify Tibet and is what makes it a unique country. However, today, with the peaceful demonstrations, protests, speeches, and writings by the people have resulted in deaths and thousands of arrests, tortures of political prisoners. This gives them almost no chance of being released. This is sad. This morning is a rare opportunity for all of us to learn more of Tibet and the human rights abuses in such a beautiful country. Thank you, most especially to Senator Miriam Defensor for graciously bringing Mr. Lhapa to us. And thank you, Mr. Lhapa, for coming to us. And thank you all for being here today. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Chair. For the opening remarks, we would like to call on one of our esteemed guests. She is well known in both local and international communities for being a staunch advocate of and activist for human rights. Currently, she is the chairperson of the Commission on Human Rights and the Southeast Asian National Human Rights Institutions Forum. Previously, she was Chair Emeritus of the Akbayan Citizens Action Party, co-chair of the Philippine Coalition for the International Criminal Court, president of the Institute for Political and Electoral Reforms, chair of the First Quarters Forum Foundation, and vice president of the Freedom from Debt Coalition. Among many others, our guest was also a representative in Congress from 1998 to 2007. She graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in Foreign Service from the University of the Philippines and took her master's degree in Asian Studies in the same university. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Chairperson Loretta Ann Vargas Rosales.
Thank you very much, Professor. In behalf of the Commission on Human Rights, in behalf of the University of the Philippines, too, of which I am an alumna, I welcome each and every one of you. Thank you for coming. This is quite a privilege to at least participate and hear the experiences of Tibet, which to many of us is a far-flung area, territory somewhere, which has had a number of human rights violations, but something we were never really aware of. This particular film that we saw hits us right there, because for many of us, and I'm sure there are some of you here, bagamat bata pa ang marami sa inyo na nakikita ko, but for many of us, in the earlier days of the dictatorship, Mr. Lhapa Tshoko, I want you to know that the human rights violations, gross human rights violations, was something that has been experienced by the Philippines before, and in fact, is a current problem of the Philippines today. So you are not alone. We empathize, we sympathize with you. That film is very touching. It hits us right here because we know how it feels. But I think that if there is any lesson at all, and we're looking forward to hearing you and the rest of the speakers before us, I think if there is any lesson that has to be learned, it is that we must cross borders. We must cross political borders. We must see ourselves as part of humanity. Realizing humanity is a universal task for each and every one of us. Human rights is universal. No matter what religion, no matter what country, no matter what sex preference, no matter what ideology, politics, income level, human rights is universal. And my dear students of UP, I was once young like you, but I did not have the privilege that you people have today of learning so much about what's going on in this world. We learned about it, but it was in the Asian Center. I have Carol Sopricheri here, a dear friend of mine since way back. And she knows because we did have a chance to go around Southeast Asia, but not in the way that you people are able to reach out to the rest of the world today. I will end up with this message. As we all try to cross borders and reach out to each and every one of us, let us not forget that it is, after all is said and done, it is a people informed, united, motivated, that will decide what makes our history. Within our country, across our borders, and internationally. In the Philippines today, the Commission on Human Rights works for the national concerns, human rights concerns of our country. However, Mr. Tshoko, I want you to know that we go beyond the Philippines. We have what is known as the Southeast Asian National Forum for Institutions, for National Human Rights Institutions Forum. And this covers, at least for the moment, 5 countries, and including Timor-Leste and ASEAN countries. I think that after this, the Commission on Human Rights will reach out to them and tell them the story of what happened here. And outside of the Southeast Asian National Human Rights Institutions, we also have the Asia Pacific Forum that covers not just Southeast Asia, East Asia, North Asia, but the Pacific Islands, Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere, up to West Asia. Again, together, we shall reach out to them. The National Human Rights Institutions that cover commissions on human rights, ombudsman, all over the world, are now more than 80 at the A status, but a number of them are qualifying. This is one of the instruments we feel that can probably help spread human rights and reach out to you and the Dalai Lama. I want you to know that, and it is a commitment because as far as the Commission on Human Rights is concerned, and I am certain that I will be affirmed by the people, not only here in UP, but elsewhere. Because we Filipinos believe in human rights, we believe in the protection of human rights, the promotion of human rights, and the active response wherever and whenever human rights violations are committed. That is our commitment, that is our resolve. Good morning, everybody.
Thank you, Chairperson Rosales. Now we can proceed to our 3 speakers, our 3 guest speakers for today. But before we proceed to them, may I just request the audience to reserve questions for our speakers in the latter portion of our program, wherein we will devote a certain amount of time to your questions. Our first guest speaker for this morning is no stranger to the cottage. He, in fact, is no stranger to a lot of us who see him often in the media. Our first speaker is the recipient of the Congressional Commendation through House Resolution number 263, which commended the House prosecution team for their unprecedented achievement during the impeachment trial of Chief Justice Renato Corona, thereby upholding the commitment to uphold the rule of law and to answer the people's call for truth, justice, transparency, and accountability. His other accomplishments include being the first Asian admitted to practice before the International Criminal Court. He is likewise admitted to practice before the UN War Crimes Tribunal for Rwanda. Our speaker is a partner in the Roque and Butuyan law offices, and concurrently, the director of the Institute of International Legal Studies in the UP Law Center. So, ladies and gentlemen, join me in honoring our first speaker, Professor Herminio Harry L. Roque, Jr.
Thank you for the kind words of introduction, Professor D, Chairperson, Professor Lhapa Salas, my idol since time immemorial, our Associate D, our College Secretary, Attorney Camille, who was one of my favorite students and a pioneer student in the very first time international humanitarian law was taught as an independent subject in this country. Fellow students of the law, good morning. My task today is to discuss the Chinese occupation of Tibet. Now, when I received the topic, I thought, well, that's pretty straightforward. We have the GA resolution. We have the Montevideo Convention that provides for the 4 elements required of statehood. And we have, as a general rule of international law, the principle that title by conquest will never be recognized as legal title. I then thought that perhaps I should do more than just discuss the Chinese occupation of Tibet, and probably deal or discuss this occupation as a case study illustrating China's propensity not only as a military power today, but also its propensity to itself project itself as a modern-day colonial power. And because this is the manner by which I will treat now the Chinese occupation, inevitably I will draw parallels between the Chinese occupation of Tibet with that ongoing controversy that we have today involving the West Philippine Sea. And I will therefore refer to the controversy in the West Philippine Sea at the end of my discussion as the modern-day Tibetization of the West Philippine Sea. So let me start now with my discussion. The PowerPoint presentation is not ready, but I don't need that PowerPoint presentation. Anyway, I only use it to guide me and remind me that my time is up by the time my last slide is shown, because otherwise, like Chairperson Eta Rosales, I love listening to myself. I also have to speak in this manner because I understand this good senator is not present, and I'm sure many of you came also to hear her many, many jokes before her address. Unfortunately, since I did not realize that the senator would not be here, I did not bring the same number of jokes that she would have delivered today. So settle for that one. Okay? Now, let me begin by discussing what Tibet was, or has been, and the commonalities that we have with them. Well, both Tibet and the Philippines are really ancient civilizations. Probably we could concede that Tibet is an even more ancient civilization. Like us, they have also had a history of foreign powers wanting to dominate it. But Tibet was more astute in its ways because it knew that as a very small country, it could not resist foreign domination. So what it did was to come up into an agreement with them whereby in exchange for providing for spiritual guidance, for providing for friendly relations, foreign countries would in turn extend protection to the little country that it is. So since the year 2000, it has been recognized as an independent state, as in fact it had fulfilled the 4 elements of statehood before we even knew what the Montevideo Convention would be many, many years later. It had a fixed territory, as in fact until today, the metes and the bounds of that fixed territory is well established. What used to be Tibet at the time of the Chinese invasion of 1950 is today recognized as an autonomous region of China. The surrounding territory of what used to be ancient Tibet is also recognized as such, except that the surrounding territory were absorbed by China earlier than the 1950s. But make no mistake about it, when we talk of Tibet, we exactly know where the territory of that state is planet. There's also been an established population. In fact, we all know that Tibet is the place sacred to Tibetan Buddhism, as in fact it is synonymous with the exercise and beliefs of this religious group. It has had a government since ancient times. The Dalai Lama today is the recognized head of government, albeit in exile. And make no mistake about it, even 2,000 years ago, the forefathers of the current Dalai Lama had been in existence. Now, and likewise, it has had and been exercising the power to enter into treaties with other states. A treaty, as you know, is defined under the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties as an agreement in writing, entered into by sovereign states and governed by international law. 2,000 years ago, Tibet stood as equal to its neighboring countries, both powerful, India and China. And in fact, we have historical documents indicating that even during those very early days, Tibet had already entered into treaties with its neighbors and other countries. Now, all this changed in the 1950s when China invaded Tibet. It was in fact in 1950s, albeit the surrounding territories were conquered earlier in 1949. Now, as soon as the Chinese invaded, and they were invaded by an army of 40,000 strong men, Tibet, of course, had not much of an option but to, in fact, surrender, because it did not have an army that can fight off the PLA. And it entered into what is known as the 1951 17-point agreement. The 17-point agreement provided for self-rule on internal matters while recognizing the occupation by the PLA. And among others, the 17-point agreement also recognized that, number one, the Dalai Lama shall continue to exercise his powers as leader of the nation. There shall be freedom of religion. And the political structure of Tibet will in fact be recognized. Now, unfortunately, Beijing did not honor its commitments under the 1951 17-point agreement, as in fact, it prevented the free exercise of religion in Tibet, and likewise, it discarded and in fact ignored the powers of the Dalai Lama. This led to a bloody uprising in 1959, which of course led to the exile of the Dalai Lama, accompanied by 80,000 of his supporters. But going back to international law, make no mistake about it. Since Tibet in 1950 and since 2,000 years ago was in fact an independent state, its current occupation by China did not lead to the extinguishment of the state known as Tibet, but has instead resulted in a military occupation, which under the rules of international humanitarian laws, therefore, is governed by the Geneva Conventions. Now, it's interesting that in the 1950s, after the invasion of China, the Dalai Lama, in fact, sought assistance from the United Nations. Unfortunately, in the structure of the United Nations, threats to international peace were referred to the Security Council. And in the Security Council, it has always been the practice that 5 nations were considered to be more powerful than others because they had the veto power, or the veto vote. Unfortunately for Tibet, it was then the United Kingdom that opposed any adoption of a resolution by the Security Council to deal with the threat to international peace. That was in fact occurred in the 1950 invasion. Now it's interesting that even then, although the UNSC did not act on the matter, the General Assembly did debate the issue. It adopted at least 3 resolutions condemning the systematic violations of human rights, including the right to self-determination of the Tibetan people. This right is defined as a right of a people to determine their political system, including the decision on whether or not they would seek independence from a state that is exercising jurisdiction over them, or whether or not they would join another existing state. Now, what's important, though, is during the debates, the Philippine permanent representative to the UN took the floor and was one of those who argued, rather articulately, that the invasion of Tibet was illegal because Tibet has been recognized as a state, an independent state, since ancient times. I have not seen any alteration of our policy on Tibet, and therefore my conclusion is until today, we recognize the occupation of China over Tibet as being governed by the Geneva Convention. Now let me now go back to my PowerPoint. I don't have to extemporate now, yes, I talked for 2 hours. So today, the Dalai Lama is still the government, albeit in exile. As I mentioned, these are the 3 most important features of the 17-point agreement of 1951, which were in fact breached by China. And of course, later on, after China breached this, Tibet would argue that in any case, that treaty is null and void because again, under the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, any treaty entered into with the use of duress is null and void ab initio. Now, this is the exact wordings of the Philippine claim. Well, again, the right to self-determination is not an ordinary human right. It is an erga omnes obligation, meaning that for purposes of standing to sue for its enforcement, any state is vested with a standing. It is also recognized as a jus cogens law because it is now believed to be a non-derogable right. It is not subject to opt out under any circumstance. Now, this was the wordings of the Philippine delegate in the 1950s after the invasion. It is clear that on the eve of the invasion of 1950, Tibet was not under the rule of any foreign country. Now, what are some of the parallels that the Tibet experience have with the ongoing West Philippine Sea dispute? First, it's the claim to the territory by reason of an ancient title. China's been arguing that it did not acquire title over Tibet because, on the contrary, Tibet has always formed part of China's territory since ancient times. Not only do we have the exact same reason being invoked by China in the West Philippine Sea, they are also invoking that these ancient titles started in the 13th century. I'm stressing this because the Chinese are also laying a claim to the West Philippine Seas, arguing that their title over both Kalayaan and Panatag started also in the 13th century. Believe it or not. Okay? Now, how? Well, according to them, it started over in the days of Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan is not even Chinese. Except that Genghis Khan, is from Mongolia, except that his reign was so widespread, it extended as far east as China, as far west as Europe. So the difference between Tibet and China during those times was that, unlike China, Tibet did not have to be conquered by Genghis Khan. Why? Well, earlier I said that they were astute in their ways, knowing that they were small and could not resist military domination. So what they did was, in order to preclude a military conquest, they already entered into a treaty with Genghis Khan, saying that, well, we will provide you with spiritual guidance. And in exchange, we will allow you to extend protection to us. But there is absolutely no historical record that Genghis Khan made Tibet a part of China. What is clear is that Genghis Khan conquered China and entered into some kind of a contract of suzerainty, whereby in exchange for spiritual guidance, Genghis Khan agreed not to invade them and to afford them protection. Why then is China alleging that it has ancient titles? The only conclusion is that it is absurd. It is as if we are saying that just because France and England were at one point captured by conquest by the Roman Empire, that France now can lay a title to England, which is the exact same argument being used by China. That's the third parallel, the absurdity of the claim to historical title. Why? Because in the West Philippine Sea, they are asserting ancient title when that is a legal impossibility. Why? Because under Confucian law, which governed ancient China, they had no concept of modern-day sovereignty. In fact, sovereignty, and I hope the scholars from the Asian Center of UP will correct me if I'm wrong, sovereignty under the Confucian legal system was exercised only over human beings, never over territory. And in fact, it was coterminous with the coast and did not go beyond the mainland. And that is why until today, China considers itself as the Middle Kingdom, the center of the universe. Now, so this is the ancient claim. But the reality is, since the time of Genghis Khan, Tibet has been left alone from the 1300s until the 18th century. And what happened in the 18th century? Well, it was during the 18th century this time when the so-called Manchus conquered China. Now, ever since Genghis Khan agreed to that arrangement with Nepal, you see, there was the renaissance of Tibetan Buddhism. Part of the deal was you would provide me with spiritual guidance. That continued since the days of Genghis Khan. And the evidence is that, in fact, in the area around Tibet, including Mongolia, as far as Mongolia, no one can deny that Tibetan Buddhism is still the #1 religion in the area. So it persisted. In fact, it became institutionalized during the 18th century. Okay? Because the Manchus, like Genghis Khan, also entered into an agreement, no? Where, again, the leaders of the rulers of Tibet, the Dalai Lama, would become the spiritual guide of the Manchu emperor, and in exchange, they were granted patronage and protection for China. Take note again, there is absolutely no historical record that Tibet ceased to exist as an independent state. Now, this continued until in 1912, the Dalai Lama reaffirmed its independence, exercised its power as government of Tibet, and aside from the reaffirmance of its independence, he also, among others, came up with a decision that Tibet, like Switzerland, could be neutral during World War II, something that the Allied forces, including China, did not like. Then there was also establishment of diplomatic relations with neighboring countries, okay? And other states also affirmed the independence of Tibet. For instance, Great Britain, which ironically was the country that prevented the UN from acting on the 1950 invasion, Great Britain declared that they were not going to recognize Chinese suzerainty over Tibet unless China signed the draft Simla Convention of 1914. China never signed that contract, and therefore Britain never recognized that there was any relationship between China and Tibet. Even Nepal, its neighboring country as well, recognized the existence of Tibet as a separate state, which is found in documents presented to the United Nations in support of Tibet's application then for membership in the United Nations. So what are some of our conclusions? Yes, I take up too much of your time. well, the Tibet since ancient times has fulfilled the 4 elements of statehood. And it does not matter that not too many countries recognize that this is so. And obviously, if you remember your course on PIL, or if you are taking PIL today, to I see my students here, I'd like to assure you, sir, our distinguished guests, that they were not required to attend. They were simply promised an incentive, which is different from making it mandatory. They're here because they're very keenly interested in Tibet, and they want the incentive. Right? The non-recognition by many does not matter, because recognition, we know today, is not an element of statehood. It is merely declaratory of the fact that one is a state, and it is a manifestation of your readiness to enter into diplomatic relations. It is merely declaratory and had ceased to be considered as an element of statehood. So the conclusion, therefore, is that being an established state, the occupation since 1950 is a military occupation. It has not led to the extinguishment of the Tibetan state, and it will never, therefore, ripen into a legal title as far as Russia is concerned. Now, since I'm approaching this as a case study on how China has become a modern-day colonial power, what then could we conclude insofar as China's alleged ancient title over the West Philippine Sea is concerned? Well, judging from what it has done in Tibet, we can conclude, number one, that the manner by which it seeks to expand its territory is always through historical fighting, even if it becomes absurd, as I've explained earlier. And that as was the case in the 1950 invasion of Tibet, China will not hesitate to resort to the use of force in expanding its territory. I just came back from Vietnam, and one of those that I met with was the director of the Institute of East Asia Studies of the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam, which is an academic institution appended to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And it was he who said that these Chinese fishermen are all armed. In fact, he says not only are they armed, they're under the leadership of a full member of the Chinese armed forces. Had there been a full-blown military confrontation between these armed fishermen and armed forces of another state, that would be perfectly fine, because they're pretending to be civilians, but they're not. Fortunately, it is not yet perfectly in the absence still of a full-blown armed conflict. And then as a director, and they take, they refer to the West Philippine Sea as East Asian Sea. And in other publications, they will refer to it as East Asian Sea with a footnote that the Philippines refers to it as the West Philippine Sea. I think we took it from them to rename the South China Sea to the West Philippine Sea. But it was he who also told me that aside from the fact that the Chinese fishermen are in fact armed, he opined that in fact, although China will not fire the first shot, there's certainly indication now that China is just waiting, not for Vietnam to make the mistake of firing the first shot, but of the Philippines to make this mistake. So they're there, armed, just waiting for the time when we as a country make the mistake of shooting the first order. A third conclusion is, if there is a conflict in the West Philippine Sea, the UN system may not be an effective mechanism to prevent the use of force. Again, this is because threats to international peace fall under the primary jurisdiction of the UN Security Council, and unfortunately, China is a permanent member of that council with the veto vote. Right now, we have a humanitarian disaster in Syria, the UN system has not been able to utilize Chapter 7 measures, known as collective security measures, because the Russians have threatened to veto any such resolution. The same thing happened in the 1950s when China invaded Tibet. Only it was the UK that threatened to veto any Security Council resolution. So the alternative, therefore, is not to expect and not to rely on the Security Council in case of a full-blown armed conflict, which we, of course, hope and pray will never happen. But there has already been a precedent that the UN system need not be inutile in these circumstances. Why? Because in the 1950s and 60s, the UN, because the Russians threatened to veto any resolution that would be adopted to deal with the situation in Congo, the General Assembly instead opted to adopt what is known as the Uniting for Peace Resolution, which authorized the deployment of UN peacekeeping forces into the former Congo. Now this led to an advisory opinion, in fact, because Russia refused to pay for expenses assessed by the UN for the maintenance of these peacekeeping forces. And the basis of its objection was the General Assembly had no jurisdiction in the first place to authorize these peacekeeping forces. Fortunately, the ICJ said that while it is true that the Security Council has primary jurisdiction in dealing with threats to international peace, it does not enjoy a monopoly in this regard, as in fact the General Assembly may also exercise powers relating to it. And that was why the ICJ said that the assessment for the peacekeeping forces in the Congo was in fact a legal assessment. So these are the conclusions. Again, I stress that the Philippines, as a member of the UN and as a civilized country, has renounced the use of force in its foreign policy. We maintain that it remains illegal, and I do hope that, as warned by Vietnam, we will not make the mistake of shooting the first bullet in the West Philippine Sea. But let me conclude by saying that perhaps where we differ with Tibet is the fact that throughout our history, we may have recognized that we are small, that we are weak, but unlike Tibet, history has shown that we will fight. Thank you very much, and good morning to all.
Thank you, Professor Roque. Before we proceed with our next guest speaker, we would like to share a message from Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago. Senator Santiago wishes to send her deepest regrets for not being with us today. She is currently feeling a bit under the weather, but had she been stronger, she would have been with us. She thanks all of our guests and students for supporting this noteworthy event of the UP College of Law, the Tibet Support Group Philippines, and the UP Law Student Government. She hopes that everyone will stay until the end of the forum and partake in the lunch prepared by the UP College of Law, and take it as an opportunity to further interact and learn more from our distinguished guests. For anyone who wishes to learn more about this topic, the organizers encourage you to visit these websites. There is www.ppsnetwork.blogspot.com and www.tibetphilippines.webs.com. Our next guest speaker will discuss the human rights situation of Tibetan refugees in Nepal. He is Father Jim Thomas, the Associate Director of the Jesuit Refugee Services of Asia. Father Thomas wishes to acknowledge Mr. Darwin Delatado from Amnesty International, without whose invaluable assistance Father Thomas's presentation would not be possible. So without further ado, let us welcome Father Thomas.
Good morning. In my capacity as Director of JRS Asia and Magna Carta Center Nepal, it is a distinct duty and privilege to stand here with you to address the vital issues of displaced Tibetan refugees. Their struggle for human rights, freedom of religion and protection of language, culture and environment. I stand here as a humble priest, prepared to play the fullest part in defining, developing, and deploying the values of my faith in God. The same values that may make us all worthy to call ourselves sons and daughters of our Father in heaven. From wherever we are drawn today for this event, we are members of a community of humanity seeking leadership in fragile times. Let us embrace this opportunity as one committed corpus rather than fight for sectional interest and be scattered like so many disparate shards of self-interest protecting privileged positions. Let us be true to the concept of community, for it means together we serve. And when we consider Homo sapiens, our species name, it means wise man. And we must measure the merit of our policy, the wisdom we are applying to ensure the safety, security, and effective resettlement of tragically displaced persons who cry for our helping hand to the delivery of their destiny. Shakespeare told us 400 years ago, there is a tide in the affairs of men, which if taken at the flood, leads on to great fortune. Omitted, all the voyages of their lives are confined to the shadows and the miseries. Today's tide is the unprecedented crescendo of the human family. Our family has doubled in numbers from the time of Christ to 1600. The first billion was reached 200 years ago. We swelled to 3 billion by the year 1970, and in March 2012, we reached 7 billion. This is an unprecedented picture of population pressure, accompanied by a rising tide of refugees worldwide. I pray that we can stand shoulder to shoulder on the shoreline of resolve to not just like the Dutch icon, put a finger in the dike, but deliver a holistic policy that addresses the fundamental cause of the current crisis. For crisis can be depicted as a dangerous opportunity. Churchill told us that we are changing the world faster than we can deal with by legislation, and we will all know that the letter of the law is less important than the spirit of the law. So I especially welcome the spirit of unity and purpose I can sense for this vital issue we must resolve, to turn the tide of apathy and inaction to a gathering swell of common sense. For growth without communication is cancer. We are called upon to act with urgency and equity. We know that, in the words of John Donne, no man is an island. Our fate and destiny is all interconnected in ways we are increasingly coming to understand. We know that we can become an acupuncture point of influence, awakening the world to these vital issues. We look back in shame at the chilling narrative of self-serving caution and flaccid will, which the global community ignored the murder of some 800,000 Tutsi and Hutu in Rwanda. On September the 11th, 2001, the world was awakened as one. But at the same time, we know that the equivalent of 20 fully laden 747s crashing every day is the number of children's lives taken by impure water. In a world awash with alarm over terrorist attacks, there is little action on addressing access to potable water and the staples of life and the plight of so many refugees. We hope that today's event will help us to position ourselves prominently in the hearts of our planet as a people who understand the feeling of being locked out and vulnerable as our Tibetan brothers and sisters are. I especially welcome this forum and as a privilege to the voices of the refugees, often ignored. But if you recall the canary in the coal mine, when its voice was no longer heard, the miners knew the environment was toxic and would leave. Similarly, the family of man ignores the voice of Tibetans at its peril. As Japanese industrialist Konosuke Matsushita and Egypt's Anwar Sadat both once declared, peace is the product of harmony and prosperity. A Stanford University study by Dr. Philip Hartner points out that if the world's population were shrunk to a village of 100, 6 would possess 60% of the world's wealth, and all would be Americans, whilst 80 would be living in substandard housing, 70 would be illiterate, 50 malnourished, 1 tertiary educated, and only 1 with a computer. Harvard University economist Jonathan Sachs wrote in The Economist that in 1970, the UN mandated that nations commit 0.7% of their national income in foreign assistance. Today, only the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, and Norway do that. Professor Sachs was particularly scathing of the derisory level of aid applied by his native USA. But that finger-pointing is never profitable, for when we point one finger at others, we point 3 at ourselves. No one is to blame, but everybody is responsible. We are all in this together. Today we must ask, are our theories up to the challenges that abound? For the world has enough, as Gandhi said, for every man's need, but not for every man's greed. How deep is our humanity? We have serious work to do, and as the Lebanese philosopher Khalil Gibran declares, work is love made visible. And as the Christian faith teaches, God is love. We are gathered to summon the wisdom of the region to create the structure to deliver a quality of life in fragile times. The debate will be passionate and political, but when real people's lives and rights and liberty are at stake, let us recall that Albert Einstein was a refugee. Each refugee is an opportunity for exultant service worthy of our hopes of humanity. Finally, I ask that you forgive and pray Senator Miriam Santiago for her absence due to a severe cold, and that you will forgive us for the last-minute changes in the format of our presentations today. Although we are certain that in the Q&A session, we will cover all that is relevant and current in the Tibetan struggle. I would now like to introduce Darwin Delatado, a second-year law student in Manila, who is a long-time volunteer at Amnesty International Philippines, conducting human rights training modules and other important work for them. Darwin will make a presentation that we hope will inspire you to get involved in the Tibet support work. We want to hear from anyone interested in joining the network, and please don't be shy to approach us afterwards. We are hoping to build on this event with more activities in Manila in the near future. So we really need your help and support. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Distinguished guests, thank you, Father Jim, thank you. Fellow students, good morning. As we all know, the struggle of the Tibetans are not that popular, and so it goes that only few efforts, only few movements have been created in support of the Tibetan flight. And so today, Father Jim wants you to see this few slides. It may inspire some of us to at least take a stand and join in this great struggle. So here are the timelines of some involvements. First and foremost, why do we have to care about Tibet? What is happening in Tibet? So we have to know some facts for us to understand that there is indeed some serious things happening there. So around 1.5 million are dying in Tibet, dying for no reason. And around 150,000 are fleeing, leaving the country, looking for refuge in some other territories. Well, traveling is is an interesting activity, especially if you travel for leisure, if you travel for work. But if you travel just to run away from persecution, it's something that's not enjoyable. So today, Nepal is one of the biggest hosts of the Tibetan refugees. Around 18,000 have been given refugee status. But this is just a minimal number because a lot of them, thousands, are still yet to acquire their refugee status. They still don't have official status. So that is a very hard status. Nobody is taking care of you. You don't have any identity, and it's very hard. So in the recent years, average of at least 8 Tibetans are leaving the country just to look for refuge in other countries. You might be saying, what about us in the Philippines? There are about at least 800 or more OFWs leaving the country. Well, at least that is for work. But 8 persons leaving a country just to run away from persecution is a considerable number. So here are some of the working groups who are currently and actively working closely with the Tibetan people. So as early as in the 1580, our brother Jesuits have been working closely with the Tibetan people. They are the brothers of Father Jim, and up to this day, they're still there working with the Tibetans. So Father Andrade is one of the first European who have crossed the Himalayas and been working with the Tibetans. And today, his brothers are still there. As of today, these two organizations are the ones that are giving a lot of support, a lot of social services to the Tibetan refugees. First is the Caritas Nepal and Magna Carta Center Nepal, which is the organization of Father Jim. So Caritas International Nepal have been providing a lot of services. They've been helping the refugees come up with their own source of living, helping them train with livelihood programs, and giving all kinds of relief services to them. And for Magna Carta Center is working hard. They've been there promoting democracy, promoting human rights. And Father Jim have been traveling for quite some time, going to different countries, trying to organize movements, student groups, who are willing to express their support to the Tibetan plight. So this is one of the hallmark project of Magna Carta Center Nepal. In 2011, they conducted a World Refugee Day seminar, and this was attended by no less than the country representative of the United Nations High Commissioner on the Refugees. So the best we can hear from the United Nations is they're calling upon nations to stand up, but it's a very sad reality that not even the United Nations could give a better statement than this. Yes, we want the statements, but we want action. So here are some local efforts. There is this Tibet support group, Global Philippines. They've been there for some time, although most of us may not have heard them much, but they're there trying to organize some movements, some activities in support of the Tibetan people. Another group is the Circle of Friends Tibet. This is based in Cebu. And initially, this organization was formed just to deal with the local problems of Cebu. They've been dealing with the environmental issues there. But eventually, they shifted their program and they have included in their order of activities the issue about Tibet. They've been there discussing it, and they've been doing some activities to inform the public about what's happening in Tibet. So they've initiated some programs, such as the Friends for Tibet. This is a province-wide campaign. And that is their slogan. Tibet is not part of China, never was, never will. And there is this global activity wherein it's called Candle for Tibet. It is a global effort wherein everyone has been called for to join this activity. Simultaneously, around the world, people will be lighting candles, and the Friends for Tibet in Cebu have participated in this activity. So those are their activities. I will just run it faster. And they also have sponsored a concert dedicated for Tibet. This is a free concert, and during the concert, they've been showing a lot of information about Tibet. Oh, it's not playing. Anyway, so this is supposedly a video clip about the concert for Tibet, but it's not playing. So, why did Father Jim and Mr. Lhapa wanted you to see these slides? Tibet, since the occupation, has been turned into a theater of violence, theater of human rights violation. And in this theater, I'm asking you, fellow students, what are you in this theater? Are you are you just there watching? Are you there relaxed, watching in this theater? Are you just spectators? Or would you choose to take a stand? I remember in our human rights class, our professor shared us this line in a poem, and it says that when a man laughs, the whole world laughs with him. But when he cries alone. Today, and for a long period of time, Tibet has been crying. Tibet is bleeding. Are we going to leave Tibet alone, crying and bleeding? Or are we going to take a stand and convey to the Tibetan people that they are not alone? We are with them. Yes, we may be students, but are we going to wait that by then that we're lawyers for us to do something? Or we can start doing something now? As we have seen, those activities in Cebu, those are being initiated by students like us. They're not professionals, they're not lawyers or whatsoever. But then in their simple capacity, they were able to convey to the whole world that they are one with the Tibetan people in their struggles. If Cebu was able to do this, it is a big challenge for us here in Manila. With all our resources, can we not do it? Father Jim is challenging you. Mr. Lhapa is asking your help. Stand up. Make some noise. Let us remember that all it takes for evil to succeed is for good men to do nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Jim, and thank you, Mr. Delatado, for your presentation. Once again, we encourage anyone who wishes to learn more about today's forum, about today's topic, to visit the following websites. There is www.tpsnetwork.blogspot.com, and there is www.tibetphilippines.webs.com. Now let us proceed to our final guest speaker for the morning. Our guest speaker will share the message of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and of His Excellency, the Prime Minister of Tibet. Our guest is Mr. Lhapa Tshoko, the representative of East Asia of His Holiness, the representative to East Asia, rather, of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama.
Good morning to everybody. This is now 53 years since we Tibetans have been rendered as refugees, and 3 generations are going on. My parents' generation, and my generation, and my children's generation. We have been rendered as refugees. We Tibetans are scattered all over the world, and our more than 2,000 years history, Tibetan government that has been rendered as a government in exile in India, and today we call it Central Tibetan Administration. And for us Tibetans, this is the continuation of our historic Tibet history. So today our former speakers, especially Professor Harry Rock, made a very, very elaborate explanation about Tibetan history, and also the Father Jim's presentation that carried a lot of sufferings that we Tibetans have been through. Now I would like to, before I read out the message, I would like to add few things, few recent happenings which are very important. His Holiness Dalai Lama, when he took over Tibet's the responsibility in Tibet, he wanted to make democratic changes in Tibet, but unfortunately he could not carry on those things because of the serious situation that developed inside Tibet. So as soon as he came to India in 1959, he started Tibetan government in exile in Dharamsala, and in 1963 started the constitution, draft constitution for future Tibet. And today we call it as charter, not exactly Tibetan constitution. And then in 2001 we achieved, or we made a very important progress in electing the Prime Minister or the Chairman of the Kashak through popular vote. So His Holiness, as a staunch believer of democracy, consequently he has encouraged Tibetans in exile to follow democratic process. Today, the Tibetan refugee community may be among the few refugee communities that have established all 3 pillars of democracy: legislature, judiciary, executive. So it becomes a repetition, but in 2001 we took another great start in the process of democratization by having Kalön Thipa of the Kashak, which means the chairman of cabinet of the Tibetan administration in exile by popular vote. So, under the democratization process, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has devolved his political power last year, August 2011, to a Tibetan political leadership who has been elected by the Tibetan people. New Tibetan political leadership called Dr. Lobsang Senke continue to follow middle way approach policy. The middle way approach policy is we are not seeking total independence. No, we are satisfied with the current so-called Tibet Autonomous Region in Tibet. So the middle policy is somewhere in the middle. The middle way policy offers the Tibet's foreign policy and defense to the Chinese government, and rest we are asking leave everything to the Tibetans. Middle way approach policy, the purpose is to resolve the Tibetan issue Tibetan struggle will remain non-violent, and through dialogue to resolve the Tibetan issue, non-violence is not a strategy to gain support, but fundamental to our value system. We always hope for the best and prepare for the worst. That the new Chinese leadership will respect the aspiration of the Tibetan people to respect religion freedom and human rights of the Tibetan people. We cannot foresee future, but hope for the best. Since 2008, there was a peaceful demonstration all over Tibet, which led to killings, imprisonment, and more repression on the Tibetan people. That further led to more protests and self-immolation. 44 self-immolation cases took place all over Tibet. There were monks, nuns, nomads, and the students. The main demand was to have religious freedom, human rights, and return of His Holiness Dalai Lama to Tibet. Because of present situation inside Tibet, they do not allow international media and international community to visit Tibetan area. In Lhasa, they have barred even tourists to visit Lhasa. Tibetans from other areas are also asked to leave Lhasa. Our demands are: request the international community to send fact-finding delegation to Tibet to find out real situation inside Tibet, and the international media to visit Tibet and report on the real situation inside Tibet. The two envoys of His Holiness Dalai Lama who had dialogue with China have resigned recently out of frustration in resolving the Tibetan issue. However, Tibetan leadership will continue to work for the Tibetan issue through dialogue. The envoys can be in the name of His Holiness Dalai Lama. We regard the result more important than the process. Tibetan leadership is being elected by Tibetans living in more than 44 countries. Today we have Tibetan Parliament, and we also have international Tibetan parliamentary support groups, and we also have Tibet support groups in different parts of the world. There are more than 35 Tibet support groups all over the world. Like in Japan, this year, we had our new political leadership visited Japan, and about 90 member of parliaments, they met with our Prime Minister, and it was very, we received a great deal of support. So now, since His Holiness feels that after 2001, then after that 2011 August, we achieved complete sort of new political leadership, and His Holiness handed over all the political power to the new leadership. Therefore, His Holiness feels that our new political leadership stand firmly on their foot. So today, instead of His Holiness' message, I have preferred our Kalun Tiba's message, Dr. Lobsang Sengke's message, which I am going to read now. I am most pleased to know that a forum entitled Respect for the Tibetan People's Fundamental Rights and Democratic Freedom is being held at the University of Philippines College of Law on July 27, 2012. The last war brought to fore the imperativeness of fundamental human rights for dignity and the need for democratic freedom to sustain them. Concerted global visions put in place international instruments to postulate, safeguard, and nurture them. Obviously, there have been disappointments, but by and large, the world has respect, much benefit. Unfortunately, around the same time, Tibet became victims of occupation. Since 1949, Tibet has suffered immense repression under the government of People's Republic of China, PRC. United Nations General Assembly passed resolutions on Tibet in 1959, 1961, and 1965 to substantiate this and to say that Tibetan people could enjoy all fundamental human rights, including the right to self-determination. The role of Philippines at the debate has been vital and historical. The ambassador of the Philippines, Mr. Salvador P. Lopez, referred to Tibet as an independent nation and added, 1. It is clear that on the eve of Chinese invasion in 1950, Tibet was not under the rule of any foreign country. He described China's occupation as the worst type of imperialism and colonialism, past and present. After 60 years, the situation in Tibet, instead of improving, is becoming worse. Tibetan people do not enjoy the universality of fundamental human rights under China. Under the current circumstances, democratic freedom is a dream. The spate of over 44 self-immolation in Tibet since 2009 is a proof of utterly suffocating life in Tibet. The Tibetan political leadership is steadfast in its commitment to bring about a resolution to this problem through the middle way approach, which is mutually beneficial to both the PRC and the Tibetans. It aims at Tibetans enjoying all religious, educational, social, cultural, and environmental rights under the PRC. In this context, therefore, the scheme of the forum is timely and the case for the people all over the world to seriously ponder and do something about. I commend this initiative and urge you to take concrete steps to help Tibetan people. I have no doubt that this forum will be a success and that it will in turn facilitate many more similar initiatives in the Philippines. Finally, I wish to thank the University of Philippines, College of Law, Tibet Support Group Philippines, UP Law Student Government, and all other associated with this meeting. With warm regards, yours sincerely, Dr. Lobsang Singhe, Kalun Chipa. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lhapa, Tshoko. As the table for the open forum is being prepared, we'd like to once again encourage everyone to visit the following websites should they wish to learn more on today's topic. The websites are www.tpsnetwork.blogspot.com and www.tibetphilippines. Guest speakers today, you may formulate your questions now. In the meantime, we'd like to remind everyone that after the forum, there will be a brief press conference to be held in the Malcolm Theater, for which everyone is invited to partake. We'd like to call on our guest speakers, Professor Roque, Father Jim, Mr. Lhapa Tshoko, and Chairman Eto Rosales to the stage to address any questions from our audience. This event is brought to you by the UP College of Law in cooperation with the Tibet Support Group of the Philippines and the Law Student Government. It appears we have time to entertain several questions. May we ask a member of our audience, any member of our audience, for a question for our guests? We have a microphone in the middle of the venue. Just proceed there.
Good morning. Hello. Good morning. I'm Lucio Pitlo III. I'm from the UP Asian Center. I'm a graduate student. Two questions. One is regarding Tibet. I have heard that China is encouraging Han migration to Tibet, Qinghai, and other historical parts of Tibet. How is this changing the demographics in Tibet? And number two, about the plight of Tibetan refugees in India and Nepal. As China is growing and becoming more close in its relations with India and as well as Nepal, how is China's pressure affecting Nepal's and India's treatment of Tibetan refugees? Thank you.
I think I'll ask Dr. Lhapa. You answer the first question, I'll answer the second one.
The total population of Tibet is 6 million. And out of that 6 million, 1.2 million Tibetans have been died because of the consequences of the Chinese occupation of Tibet. Then after that, again, since 2008, a lot of Tibetans have been killed. Although Chinese government, they officially say that 20 Tibetans have lost their life. But according to our record or information, there are some 6,000 to 7,000 Tibetans have lost their life, if not more than that. So today in Tibet, the number of Tibetans compared to Chinese migrants into Tibet, the Tibetans have become, it is becoming a minority in our own land. The entire economy is controlled by Chinese. Then the railway line, which China, they say they have brought development, modernization. Of course, we Tibetans are not against the modernization or development, but these modernization developments are not benefiting the Tibetans. And these modernization or the trend line, that is to fulfill their military design or to take out the Tibetan mineral resources. Therefore, the Tibetan population and the Chinese population are much more. And in these trends, each day they bring 5,000 to 4,000 passengers into Tibet, and maybe half of them they return, and the remaining half they try to settle in Tibet. So this is how the demography of Tibetan population is being directly affected.
Just as a comment on that first question before I answer the second question, as with the new Chinese city, the Santiago, which was just announced recently, I would not be surprised if you see boatloads of Chinese people going down there. And, that's one thing the Chinese have is lots of people. So you could see, an instant city, just add water. Okay, so the second question, I'll just tell you a few things that I've observed in, say, the recent year. The new Chinese ambassador to Nepal is a very high-level diplomat and very seriously concerned with security in the region. He recently visited Pokhara. I was there at the time. And they chose a school to give a big donation, a cash donation, and a whole lot of computers. And the school happened to be near one of the Tibetan refugee camps. So the message was, well, we're going to be very generous with the Nepalese school, but we're going to ignore the Tibetans, and they can just continue their struggle. So that is the kind of thing that's going on. There's kind of a dollar diplomacy going on. With regards to India, yes, I think they're concerned, but culturally and religious, they're much closer to Nepal, India. So I think it's difficult for the Chinese to get really close to the Nepalese people. They make a lot of quiet diplomatic efforts, and as in the refugee field, one of the things that I've also noticed is that the Chinese military and the border police are stepping up cooperation with the Nepalese. They're giving them trucks, they're giving them censoring equipment, night vision equipment, and the money. And they're also offering rewards if groups of Tibetan refugees are caught, and they're offering cash rewards. So all of these kind of efforts are going on between, and in Nepal's, the ham in the middle of the sandwich, and it's a difficult situation for them. The government of Nepal has been very sympathetic, but the Chinese will be relentless in their efforts to stem the flow of Tibetan refugees, and it has actually reduced quite significantly, I'd say, in the last couple of years. It's getting more difficult to cross. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
This is a question for anyone in the panel. Why are Tibetans burning themselves as a sign of protest? And second question, are these protests by self-immolations supported by the Tibetan government?
As I've mentioned, that 44 cases of self-immolation have taken place. So only 10 people have survived. Rest all have been dead, you see. And all throughout the world, in any form of government, you enjoy certain form of conventional form of protest or demonstration in any country. But in Tibet, all these rights are denied. So the Tibetans have no alternative to express their feelings or sufferings. And now the self-immolation is some kind of form of political demonstration. And the Tibetans, we have, according to the Buddhist teaching, suicide or killing oneself is something terrible and something very, very sinful. But still, now entire country is turned into like a big sort of a prison, and then you can't do anything. So the young Tibetans who are brought up under the Chinese rule and who have not seen the outside world, and these Tibetans, they now sacrifice themselves by burning, self-immolating themselves. So this is the out of desperate and hopelessness. So even in that such state, to draw the attention of the international community, so they sacrifice themselves for the cause of Tibet. And this is the situation inside Tibet. And there was a second question?
Good morning.
One minute. So the Tibetan administration, Dharamsala, has always discouraged, requested the Tibetans inside Tibet to refrain from such sort of very extreme sort of action. And our new Prime Minister, Dr. Lobsang Sengye, has, through video message, through internet, he has openly requested Tibetans not to resort to such kind of extreme action. And but once who have already self-immolated themselves, and it is also our moral responsibility to reach their aspiration or their desire, their cries to the international community. Therefore, we have both we have appealed them not to resort these things, but who have already committed these things. So it is our moral responsibility to reach their cries to the international community.
Good morning, everybody. I'm not a student of this school. I'm just a bar reviewee. I am interested because I am a practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism. I just want to clarify if this is addressed to anyone in the panel. Is Tibet really united in their cause against China? Because I observed that there's this rift between Dalai Lama and Geshe-la. You know Geshe-la, sir? Geshe Kelsang Gyatso of Kadampa Buddhism and Dalai Lama of the Gelupas. And also there's this rift in the Karma Kagyu sect between the two Karmapas. And I'm just curious if are they really united, or are they do they have their own stand on this struggle? And my second question is there a chance that the Dalai Lama will visit the Philippines in the near future? Because the Karmapa, the 17 Karmapa has already visited the Philippines here last June 3 to June 8. And the next Tibetan leader that will come here is the leader of the Sakyapa school, Sakya Trisin. He will be visiting this from July 30 to August 8. And I'm just wondering if His Holiness could make an effort to visit the Philippines, since the Philippines is a country which is, I know, obviously is against China.
Well, regarding unity, of course, we Tibetans, we are going through a very difficult sort of, one of the darkest period in our history. But there are certain pockets of, differences in some issues. So, since we are, although refugee community, but we fully practice democracy. All the democratic form of practice is being implemented in our community. So, it is the individual's right to express their views. And on the whole, I think we Tibetans, comparatively with other refugee community, I think we Tibetans are doing pretty well. So this is one thing. And second thing is regarding his visit by His Holiness Dalai Lama to Philippines. Of course, we would really look forward to take this place one of these days. But now, when it comes to inviting His Holiness to Philippines, so it all depends on the Philippine side, whether the Philippine government is ready to issue visa or not. And second thing, if like University of Philippines invite His Holiness to Philippines to talk on human value or universal responsibility or things like that. Like he has been visiting a lot of other universities around the globe. So this is possible. And I really look forward to such kind of opportunity. Thank you.
We have time for one last question. Okay, two more questions.
Okay. Can I speak here?
Okay.
Let's rock and roll here. Anyway, I'm a political guy. I'm Edgar Vargas. Some of my Buddhist friends are here. I'm a Buddhist practitioner. This is not what you call typical struggle question. Well, I've been struggling all my life. We have so many laws already in place. We have so many organizations. Now, this question is more on my practice, which involves karma. Karma is action. All of you knows what karma is, right? I hope. Well, anyway, which reminds me about one Buddhist monk in China. He left his sandals in the middle of the market, and some of the monks said, "How come you're leaving? You just leave your sandals in the middle of the market. Somebody might steal it or somebody might get it." And the monk said, "I'm not worried about that because I haven't stolen anything in my life, present life. That's why it's not being stolen." Now, going back this story, in Buddhism, if you practice, I hope I'm getting it right now, if you haven't done something bad in this life, definitely nothing will happen because that's the law of cause and effect, right? So my question is, why is it Tibet now into this situation where you're supposed to be a spiritual practitioner, right? My question is there something wrong with their spiritual practice? That you're not following Buddha's instruction properly? Or, I don't know, can you enlighten me on that?
You mean to say that despite so much of a spiritual practice,
Yes.
why the Tibetans are facing this kind of
Correct.
fate? You mean to say that,
Yes,
right?
yes.
I think we Tibetans believe in the law of karma.
Okay.
So the individual karma, Tibetan people as a collective karma, and Tibetan country as a karma. So I think this is what that we have collected in the past, maybe such kind of karma. So we are going through. Now we are in the middle of, I mean...
So heavy karma, right? Let me ask you one more question. Please bear with me. Do the monks in Tibet eat meat?
Well, see now regarding monks eating meat, in Tibet, the height of Tibet, the people, the lowest level of
Can I
people,
have just simple yes and no? I'm a simple guy. I don't need
well,
technicalities.
I have to give you some explanation.
Okay.
The lowest level of people living, that is the height of the Mount Fuji in Japan, 4,000 meters. And in such kind of land, it is
you
so
cannot
cold
cultivate
that
vegetation.
not
Yes, I know.
much
I understand that.
Yes.
But just so they eat meat.
Well, there has been
Yes
a
and
practice.
no. Simple.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Because I understand the way. Okay. I think that answers my question. It's simple but profound on my part. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have time for one more question. Anyone else who has questions, you can address your questions later to our guests over lunch. Madam?
Thank you for entertaining one more question, and thank you to our guests for all the inputs. I am certainly going to look at the websites mentioned, but I'm interested to ask you about the economic dimension of the invasion. For us, for example, in the West Philippines issue, we are thinking it's because of the oil. You mentioned minerals.
Yes.
What minerals? I also heard before something about medicinal plants. What is the economic interest of China? And also another question, but I don't know if Professor Harry is still around. For the Philippines, we're talking about the legal avenue to settle the problem in terms of the law of the seas. But is there a legal avenue on this issue?
Well, the first part of the question, why, in the first place, why the Chinese have, what kind of design they have to invade Tibet? You can think of four things. The first thing is size of the country is maybe Japan 6 or 7 times big. So Philippines, I don't know how much size, you see. The size of the country is huge. And then the vegetation. In the TV, you see Tibet, a very deserted area. But Tibet has got one of the thickest forests in the world. some trees are so big. I mean, like Japan and Korea, they have the big drums. To make that kind of drum, you hardly find trees elsewhere in the world. But the Chinese, they find in Tibet. So they send it to Japan and Korea. This is one thing. Then third thing is the river. 10 major rivers, it has got source in Tibet. And today, Chinese government, they are trying to convert the flow of Brahmaputra river. In Lhasa, near Lhasa, we have a river called Tsangpo River. When it flows into India, it is known as Brahmaputra River. Further, it flows into Bangladesh, which is known as Padma River. So one river has got 3 names. And now they are trying to build a dam and convert the flow of the river into China to solve the shortage of water supply in China. China has today acute shortage of water in 300 cities. This is one river. And third one is natural resources, like 136 natural resources, mineral resources, including uranium, gold, copper, and so many things. So then a fourth one is more than that is strategic, militarily strategic importance. So the Tibet is known as the roof of the world, and some people say that they make push-button systems where they can push one button and send a missile to New Delhi or United States. So this kind of militarily very, very important strategic. So because of these reasons, China really needs Tibet so badly. So big natural resources, river water is a very important issue now. Today we see the world is fighting for petroleum. And tomorrow the expert says that we human beings may have to fight for the water. So China can have the control of Tibet's 10 river system, major, which has got, I think, to do with the 13 Asian nations, has got a direct link with the Tibet's water.
Yeah, I think for the second question, you're going to have to track down the professor. We're not really into legal business. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Okay. Thank you for your questions. We apologize that we do not have sufficient time to accommodate all of your questions. But as we mentioned earlier, our guests will remain, and you may propound your questions to them over lunch. Before we conclude today's event, we'd like to once again call on our Associate Dean, Professor Concepcion Hardaleza, to give our tokens of appreciation to today's guests. Okay, we'd like to call on Professor Hardaleza. She will be accompanied by the Law Student Government President, Mr. Benedict Nesperos.
On behalf of the UP College of Law, on behalf of the UP Law Center, on behalf of all the co-sponsors in this program, thank you so much for being here, and we enjoyed the day, and we hope that we will continue on, talking to you, getting in touch with you, and promoting Tibet around us among our students and the community. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And may I take this opportunity to thank the University of Philippines, and especially the law school here, and the dean and other concerned people who have worked so hard. And this is my first visit to Manila, And I'm really touched by the great deal of response from the Filipinos, especially the students. And this is very, very encouraging for me and my Tibetan fellows. And I'll be taking this message to other Tibetans also. And I hope to start something in Philippines and hope to come back again. Thank you so much.
The UP College Sublo, thank you for being here, and we hope that you will continue on doing what you have been doing for a long time. Thank you, Father. God bless you.
Thank you very much. I thought I was part of this whole thing, giving the welcome remarks. But thank you. I like this.
Oh, and Lhapa would like to make a traditional Tibetan gesture as well. Just a second, please.
It is white. It has a design of 8 auspicious, with the wish that it brings happiness daytime, nighttime, for 24 hours.
Can we ask Camila to come up and accept one on behalf of Senator Santiago, please, for all the hard work that you and your office has done? Could you please come and accept one of these gestures from traditional Tibetan? Thank you. Okay. For Camila.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored for this. Thank you very much, and I hope you will be able to speak with the other students. I'm sure they're very, very interested. You've inspired them this morning. Thank you for giving your time to us today.
So we invite everyone to join us for our light lunch. Once again, in behalf of the UP College of Law, the UP Law Student Government, and the Tibet Support Group Philippines, we'd like to thank everyone who decided to take part in this event.